Hi, I'm Josh Carving, and welcome to another Death Battle prediction video, but first we have Sasuke versus Hiei. Okay, so this is a pretty controversial one. Most predictions were basically along the line of Sasuke winning. And I myself also leaned in the direction of Sasuke. There was a lot of things that the episode kind of went a bit far on that I will get into in a moment. One of the biggest things with that episode is that they based the entirety of the result on one single calculation. And there's a few things with that calculation that make it a little bit questionable as to whether it's actually legitimate or not. So one of the things is that they used a method that a method of getting the size of the blast that could be seen as inaccurate. Other people have used other methods of getting the size of the tree and got way lower results. This is also compounded by the fact that the feat is actually anime only. It doesn't take place in the manga. Now, I know there's a big thing with, Tenari is only in, an anime-only thing for Naruto characters, but it's still taken into account. But it's a little bit different in the case where the manga and the anime have differences. If it's, a supplementary material, such as, say, Naruto The Last, the movie there, then it's basically rational to include it. But the issue in this case is that it's different. It's an actual feat that doesn't take place in the manga, and it's also a little bit inconsistent with several other things. Main thing being that it's Yusuke in his base form, weakened, performing the best feat in the series by far. So it's easy to see how this is a bit of an outlier, because it doesn't make sense that the best feat in the series is performed in base while weakened. It just basically makes it so that it's not consistent with the rest of the series at all. And it's only really supported by somewhat vague statements from characters saying that these S-Class demons can destroy the world, which again, as I went over in my last video, is incredibly vague in regards to time frame, destroy as in make the earth go kaboom, destroy all the civilizations on the world, all sorts of things. So I also made sure to wait until they went over it on the Death Battle cast to see if they gave any other additional light on it, and I've actually talked with Strunton, the researcher for the episode. I've talked to him regarding it. This is one of those episodes that really kind of it kind of comes down to how you versus debate, because this is something that's kind of come up before, is that not everyone versus debates in the exact same way. Different people have different methods that they use, things that they see as not making sense. Some people are just ridiculously anti-scaling, for example. They refuse to scale characters to each other, which I personally think is extremely silly, because if you can damage a character, you are reasonably in the ballpark of their durability. But some people just refuse to scale, and characters have to stand on their own feet, on their own 2 feet, I guess, if you want to say it that way. So it becomes a bit of an issue when not everyone is versus debating the same way, which becomes a bit of an issue for Death Battle, because sometimes it does kind of seem like Death Battle changes up exactly how it's going about things, episode to episode at times. Which is understandable. One of the reasons why it's so understandable is because of the different mediums that are being used. For example, a Marvel Comics character, there's so much to go over, so many different things to keep in mind, that you do need to have a bit more fine-tuned as to what you're willing to accept and not accept. not scaling to characters if it's completely irrational. Like if like Spider-Man kicked Thor one time, he's not suddenly like solar system level or whatever Thor is. I believe it's around there, but so there's certain affordances that some series get, and that's going to be relevant later in this episode. So there's some affordances that some series get that others do not. And this is kind of another one of those things where it being an extremely long series like Naruto, I feel like it kind of wasn't given as many affordances. The fact that Sasuke was much faster was really glossed over. Like, to the point where Hiei is basically still a statue, even with the extrapolated, really random speed calculation they gave. Like, they said, like, a certain character was a certain amount of times stronger when he was an S-class demon, so they took that number, took it to the highest speed feat in the series, which was already a scaling chain, and then just multiplied it by that number. It doesn't actually make sense. The highest actual feat in Yu Yu Hakusho for speed is absolutely, like, it was like 280, Mach 280, I think, around Mach 300, which is absolutely nothing compared to the light speed capabilities that higher end Naruto characters have, including Sasuke. So, reasonably speaking, there isn't actually any way for Hiei to hit Sasuke. So I do have issues with this episode. I can see where people who agree with it are coming from, but personally, I definitely don't agree with this one. It's kind of up there as one of the ones that I'm gonna look back on it and probably continue to think it's wrong. There's several fights like that. Not all of them are bad episodes necessarily, but I personally just don't agree with this one for the reasons that I've gone over, in that the feat was a little bit inflated, it seems, with different people coming to different results, and this result being by far the largest and craziest in terms of result. So now, with that said, let's get into the next one, which, oh boy, this is a really big one. So Ganondorf versus Dracula. This is a really cool fight thematically. It's like what Ganondorf should have originally fought. Also, a neat fun fact: this way back in the day, like 6 years ago, maybe. The research team, before they actually officially became the research team for Death Battle, they did a fan blog together of Ganondorf versus Dracula, and included all of their armies and such. And it actually uses some pretty dated information. In that, actually, Ganondorf won, but that was before people had mined Castlevania for feats, and it was also an army versus army fight, which this one won't be, I wouldn't think. So this is going to be certainly an interesting fight, just because you have the last fight that Ganondorf was in, and its reputation. As I said in that prediction, and the episode after it, Bowser should absolutely have won, but I'm okay with that he didn't. It's one of those times where, like, Ganondorf is one of my favorite characters. That's Ganondorf Amiibo. His name is Slamendorf, by the way, and so I am definitely biased in favor of Ganon, because he's basically one of my favorite villains of all time, but that doesn't save him here at all. He should have lost against Bowser, and he even more should lose. Well, maybe not even more, depending on how you view Mario character stats. There's decently convincing arguments for universal level Bowser and multiversal level Bowser as well. Decently convincing arguments, namely the Dreamstone, but that's neither here nor there. So, Dracula, in terms of stats, dwarfs Ganondorf, like, really hard. So, first, we're going to get into a slightly controversial thing regarding this matchup, which is the holy weapons loophole thing. So, both of them actually have things where they would only be hurt by holy weapons. Ganondorf does have a holy sword, the one that he was stabbed with, again, from the sages. However, in Castlevania, there are several creatures that use an ability that basically attacks with holy fire, even though they are demonic creatures. And Dracula uses that move himself in that game. And one of the other characters who uses Dracula's own power, I don't recall her name, but she uses Dracula's power, and a lot of her attacks are holy. So weirdly enough, a lot of Dracula's attacks actually are able to even get around that very, very silly no limits fallacy that is that Ganondorf can only be killed by holy weapons, even though he can absolutely be killed by non-holy weapons. Hell, you can kill... So, Calamity Ganon with Ancient Arrows, you can kill Ganon in, I think, A Link to the Past with basically anything. Just all sorts of different weapons that you can use to kill Ganon without actually using holy weapons. So that's already a nail in Ganon's coffin. The stats game, this is a little bit of a topic that people go into a bit, and I'm not too sure where I stand on it so far, but Dracula is considered universal by a lot of people due to a lot of various parallel universes. Things like Castlevania itself being essentially a created pocket universe. And here's the part where it starts to kind of lose me, is that he's considered universal because of the presence of galaxies and stars and such in the background of that pocket universe. I don't quite agree with using that as a method of how large this pocket dimension is, because one, we don't know that actually is universes. It could simply be equivalent to a skybox, where it's meant to give them an atmosphere and ambiance. And if someone's going to say, oh, well, why would Dracula care about atmosphere in his castle? It's a well-decorated castle. Like, he would want a starry sky. Like, there's no reason he wouldn't. So, a lot of Castlevania Universal recognition is due to the fact that Dracula scales to people or has his own pocket universes that have backgrounds with starry skies and galaxies and such. There is also something called the Time Reaper, I think it is, that was essentially destroying parts of the Castlevania timeline, and people regard that as being universal. So here's where we come back to the weird topic of certain series being given affordances that other ones aren't. In this case, the most notable thing is the Time Reaper argument is very similar to the one that Sonic has, actually, with the, I believe it's called the Time Eater. It was destroying parts of the timeline, and it's considered hacks over time. Like, it wasn't all being done immediately and just destroying the timeline, like, boom, right there. It was doing it over time, which is similar to how the Time Reaper did it. So that isn't considered a universal feat. But people are giving it to Castlevania. And then likewise, you have feats like, say, Devil May Cry. Pokemon has several of these. And then even Legend of Zelda itself has backgrounds in places that were created that aren't given those affordances. So this is where we go into the stats, because we have stats including taking backgrounds and such into account, which, let me tell you right now, it's basically Universal Dracula and Ganondorf scaling to either Demise or Majora, both of which have a sun in their created pocket universes. So it would be Star, potentially solar system level, depending on if you argue that made the planet is on and the sun, and then maybe other planets around if you really want to spin it that way. But either way, it's still a drastic stomp in that direction. So then we come to speed. There's some decently relativistic, I believe it's relativistic or sub-relativistic, feats in Legend of Zelda, predominantly based around light arrows. Some of the arrows are treated as real light. Wind Waker seems to be one of the ones that people pretty heavily debate is actual light, considering it reflects off of surfaces, is used as sunlight for the sake of, like, puzzles and things. I'm not sure I agree, but sure, let's go with it. But then you have characters who literally, like, move in tandem with light in Castlevania. So it becomes, like, I believe there's also, like, a feat where telekinetically moving various things and ends up being, like, faster than light for Dracula as well. So that's a bit of a stomp too. This fight's making me sad. But anyway, let's take out those backgrounds and go with their highest actual potential without those backgrounds. So you have Ganondorf, who the strongest thing that he did was technically destroying Great Fish Isle in Wind Waker, I believe it's called. So it's an island level feat, and then with the full Triforce, you can get him up to planet level. As Calamity Ganon, he survived a blast from the Divine Beasts, which each one should be roughly even in strength, and I believe one of them has like a country level feat. So you could probably spin that Calamity Ganon, which is based from normal Ganon, depending on what Breath of the Wild 2 throws at us. So you could spin him being potentially about country level, or planet level with the full Triforce, because it holds together Lorule. Which again, that has some issues too, but let's just give it to him for now. He's not gonna have the full Triforce in the episode, but let's just give it to him for shits and giggles. So planet level, relativistic Ganondorf. As early as, I believe it's like Kid Dracula or something like that, he has a feat of telekinetically controlling like the moon and making an eclipse, which already is beyond, I believe it's high-end planet level. There's also several other feats of like basically just controlling things way bigger than island level. That TK feat is definitely the big thing there, and the fact that Ganondorf just isn't fast enough to hit him, isn't strong enough to do major lasting damage. It's just a sad time for Ganondorf. So that's basically the prediction. Ganondorf doesn't really have any advantages here. The only ones that are able to really be thought of are that he's potentially more experienced due to Dracula typically going down and then like 100 years later popping back up, but then not spending that much time being alive and getting put back down. So he spends more time being out as compared to Ganondorf, who has like full 100-year reigns over Hyrule, so technically he might be more experienced via that. It's not going to count for much, but it's there. There's also the fact that Ganondorf is much better in close combat than Dracula is. Dracula tends to prefer longer range spells in combat, but then he goes into his larger form and he can do melee fine anyway. Both of them do have their larger forms as well, which the thing I'm most excited for is the animation for this fight, because it's going to be really fucking cool. I can't wait for like the end of the fight where it's like a Beast Ganon from, I'm assuming they're going to use the Smash Bros. Ultimate one against like the beast form for Dracula. It's going to be really fucking cool. That's basically my thoughts on this one. Unfortunately, my character does not win. I'm very sad about that. Just like before, though, if Ganon does end up winning, this episode is botched as hell, but I'll be fine with that, because once again, Ganondorf is just, he's great. So in the end, yeah, Ganondorf is getting Doriad, and there's not much that he can do about it. The last thing I'll do before ending this video is recommend that you all go watch diemonster.wmv. I'm pretty much obligated to tell you to watch that. Well, you have yourselves a great one, and we'll see you next time.